All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Building a Better Associate, How to Move Past Stumbling Blocks, Build Trust, and Become a Standout at Your Firm. Uh, I think we can all agree that the legal profession demands a very high level of performance, and we may not want to admit it, but mistakes do happen. So, what do we do when it does? Maybe it's a large mistake or maybe it's small, but either way, it's something that needs to be dealt with. Uh, what's the best way to handle this? How can you recover? How can you move forward? And that's what today's presentation seeks to answer. My name is Mac Phelps. I'm a plaintiff's personal injury attorney here in Dallas at Payne Mitchell Ramsey. I'm uh, finishing up my seventh year of practice, going into my eighth year. And I think this is the CLE I wish I had when I started. I think we're very lucky to have the panel here with me to give their varied perspectives. But before I have them introduce themselves, just a couple housekeeping matters. If along the way you have any questions that you want to seek answered, please use the Q&A function. It is anonymous, and you can throw your questions in there, and there'll be a Q&A portion at the end, or if it's answered along the way, we'll address that when we do. And also, the CLE course number will be thrown in chat at some point during this presentation. So that is what you need to get credit for the CLE. So I'll make sure to remind you all at the end as well if you didn't catch that just now. So right now, I'll ask the panel to please introduce themselves.
Well, I guess with the silence, I'll go first. So my name's Robert Toby. Welcome, everybody. I am a shareholder in the law firm of Johnston Toby Baruch PC. We are best known for handling claims for and against lawyers and other professionals, including malpractice, fiduciary duty, fee disputes, ethical issues, anything that might arise in that space. We also do commercial litigation, and I was honored to be the president of the Dallas Bar Association in 2020. Thank you.
Yep. I was not a president of the Dallas Bar Association, unlike both Cheryl and Robert Toby, but I'm Dina Stroh. I am general counsel and ethics officer at North Texas Tollway Authority. I've been in-house now about 13 years, which is as long as I litigated at different law firms. So I come from this to this topic as both someone who has been at a law firm as well as the perspective of a client.
I'm Cheryl Kamen Murray, and Dina was also the president of DWLA and an officer on DAYL. And I'm also a bar junkie, been an officer of TYLA, DAYL, and DBA, all the fun acronyms. And I'm a partner at Jackson Walker in their healthcare corporate practice, helping healthcare providers and anybody in the healthcare space with their transactions and compliance issues. And delighted to be here. And I'm also an expert in mistakes. So this is right up my alley.
Well, we appreciate y'all being here and look forward to our conversation. So to to give everyone a better idea of what this presentation is about, what is a defining mistake that y'all have made in your practice, and how'd you come out on the other side?
Well, I'll start off and talk about my big mistake back when I was about max experience level. I think I was a 7-year lawyer when I think it was the expert designation deadline in a lawsuit back before most of you were born, candidly. And the first thing I did was go to the partner in charge in the case and let them know this had happened. And the advice was, well, we need to obviously come up with a plan of action to try to fix it and go to the client, tell the client what's going on, and let the client know here's what we're going to do to try to, bridge this mistake and get past it. And thankfully, everything worked out. Had a pretty reasonable lawyer on the other side who was not a jerk, which there were plenty of jerks back then, just like there are now. And everything worked out on that, and the case was resolved a short time later and to the client's satisfaction, and everything worked out. And that's certainly not the only mistake I've made in my career. I've made many of them. Cheryl talks about being an expert in mistakes. I'm sure I could teach her a few things about that. But we're all human, and I just want to start out by saying, we're all human. We all make mistakes, and it's how you react to them that really defines you. And so many times when, they talk about somebody who gets caught in a lie, well, it's really not so much the lie or the mistake, it's the cover up. And that's what really gets people in big trouble. So when you make mistakes, and we'll talk more about it, and there's an ABA opinion I'll address in a little while that kind of addresses the topic. The best thing to do is just be open and honest about it, and that will make things go a lot better. And with that, I'll yield the floor.
So we are all human, as Robert says, and all of us, if you haven't made a mistake and you're on this CLE, you will. It's just a matter of time, because that's just how life is. I'm going to mention briefly a deadline that I had messed up, and then I'm going to talk about a different type of mistake. So I had calculated a deadline for an appeal, so my appellate deadline, and I just miscalculated it. I just straight up miscalculated it. And when I identified the issue, I was horrified, of course, because it's an appeal. And as long as you figure out you've made a mistake fairly quickly, you can usually do something to fix it. And in that case, it was you literally file a motion with the Court of Appeals and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. This is how it happened. My bad." My opposing counsel declined to have this unopposed. So it had to go in front of the administrative judge at the time, which is fine. It is what it is. But it did get resolved. But that's not the mistake I want to talk about, because Robert already talked about a deadline. I was just kind of adding on sometimes there are jerks. The mistake I want to talk about is when I came back from maternity leave with my first child. During the 3 months that I had been on maternity leave, things had happened in a case. And I come back, I go immediately down to the courthouse, where I was blowing and going hours of hearings, discovery hearings, but the case had a mock trial. And the mock trial, I knew that one of my colleagues was going to handle the other side, and one of the partners at my firm was going to handle our side. And I was told at 2 p.m. the day before a 9 a.m. mock trial that I had to argue it. And I was up for partner that year. I felt like I couldn't say no. And so, but there I was, having been down at the courthouse with a colleague who'd been preparing for 3 or 4 weeks to do the argument. Well, substantively, I messed up. I could not overcome the fact that I didn't know things about the case, that I hadn't been preparing, and it really took away my superpower. My superpower in litigation is always preparation. I will tell you, I did not make partner that year. I did make it the next year, but it impacted me. And the reason I want to talk about is, for me, it was a defining mistake. How was it a defining mistake? Well, when something happens that I look terrible, right? I wouldn't. It probably now I've been practicing over 25 years. It would be no big deal, and I would make the argument. But it was the first time I had a mock trial. It was the one that was leading it, that type of thing. But I had to look into myself and go, I am a good lawyer. Something happened. It was real. That link went around to all the partners in my firm. Imagine what I felt about that, right? But I had to look into myself and say, I am a great lawyer. I know I'm a great lawyer. The circumstances were such that I couldn't say no. It is what it is. I need to move on. And how do you rebuild your confidence? Know that you're a good lawyer, and move on when something happens that just was. It happens, right? And that can be in front of a judge. That can be in my circumstance. My superpower of preparation was taken away from me. It happens. And so think about in a mistake of how you rebuild yourself. And that's what we're going to talk about as well today.
Great points. And I'll just add that, you know, how is a mistake defined? And it's defined as an action or judgment that is misguided or wrong and can include inadequate knowledge or inattention. So kind of building off of what Robert and Dina talked about, it's not only just being wrong about something, but it's maybe not having all the information, not getting the opportunity to ask all the right questions. Sometimes just not asking those questions that would get you the information you need and finding out more can lead you down the wrong path. And that can lead to, quote, a mistake. And so I will say, in my personal situation, I know of two occasions where I had a client invite me to an event. One was a client, like their party, and another one was kind of a big kind of breakfast event. And this, they were separated by years, but I think one of them, somebody else sent me the appointment and I didn't recognize it. I didn't think it was what I thought it would be. So I just thought it was some kind of random thing, and it didn't go. I was like, oh, I don't need to attend this. And then I found out later, oh my gosh, that's the thing the client invited me to. Felt horrible, that regret, kind of ruminate, or like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. Of course, apologize, emailed, but you're just sick about it. So how do we turn it into an opportunity? Follow up. So sorry. Love to get together with you one-on-one. Let's grab lunch. I'll, talk with you. And then that can actually be better, because instead of going at this attending a group event, you get to go be one-on-one with the client, have that real substantive conversation. They often understand, they feel for you. Certainly, yes, let's go to lunch, let's do that. And it can turn into something where it's a positive, but at the same time, double checking, asking, looking at things, and just making sure that you're not going too quickly throughout your day, and you kind of look at the next day can be very helpful. But these things happen.
I think that's pretty good too, to highlight that, mistakes can come in so many forms, but I think the one common thing y'all all highlighted is kind of having a short-term memory about them all. So I appreciate y'all sharing that with us. So obviously, those mistakes didn't derail your careers by any stretch. Y'all are all pretty much at the top of your fields. But given your continued success in your practices, I'd imagine you also developed an approach to dealing with mistakes that, come along every day. What is your process for doing so?
Well, let me kick off with just a couple of points that I think ought to be raised. I think one of the things that you've heard from all of us is we are all human and will make mistakes and have made mistakes. One of the things whenever I speak to really any audience, whether it's young lawyers or more seasoned lawyers, have insurance. I mean, there's so many lawyers out there who think, oh my God, if I have insurance, I'm just going to make myself a target for a malpractice case. No, there are lawyers who get sued who do not have insurance. I represent those people. And the first thing I tell them, if you had insurance, you would be sleeping better at night right now than you are right now. So get insurance, and not just buy insurance, but understand the terms of insurance, understand declining limits, understand that there are claims made, understand the need to have tail coverage. When you change firms, it's really important that you have coverage that covers back when you were at a prior firm or prior firms. It's extremely important to do that. And if you do that, we like to tell people, well, don't buy insurance if you're not ever planning to have assets. If you're planning to have assets, you should have insurance. So really, really important. It's not that expensive to get $1 million of coverage. And you will just sleep better at night, knowing that if you have made a mistake that leads to a malpractice case, you are covered. Going to the next point, really more directly applicable to Mac's question, is I wanted to talk about this ABA opinion because it really does dovetail exactly on what we're talking about. It's ABA opinion 481, came out a handful of years ago, and it talks about what do you do when you make a mistake, and it puts it on a continuum. And the first thing you look at is Rule 1.03 of the Texas Rules of Disciplinary Conduct. And 1.03 really has two parts, and we need to be focused in on both. And one is you've got to keep the client reasonably informed. That's number one. And the second thing is you've got to keep the client, you got to provide enough information to the client so that the client can make informed decisions. So both of those things are, I would, I'm not going to here to tell you that any of the disciplinary rules are not important, but I think 1.03 is the most important disciplinary rule as lawyers. And in the continuum of the fact that we make mistakes, reporting it to the client is that much more important. And the ABA opinion talks about, if it's something like I didn't prepare a proposed order for the hearing, even though it's a local rule, that's probably not something you have to report to the client. If you have missed a deadline, a more significant deadline, like an expert designation deadline or a summary judgment response deadline, God forbid, you've got to report those types of things to the client under Rule 1.3 and this ABA opinion, which basically says, looking at it from a continuum of minor mistakes that can be easily corrected, do not have to be reported to the client. Major mistakes have to be reported to the client. And also, one other thing to keep in mind in this space is that if it's a severe enough mistake where you, to fix it, are really kind of looking out after your firm, even more so than your client, then you've got now a conflict of interest in representing the client. So you have to make that analysis at the front end. Another thing the ABA opinion says is you can go get help before you tell the client. You can go talk to your firm general counsel. You can talk to the lead lawyer on the case, whatever it is that's out there as a resource, you can tap into that. But you should not wait an extended period of time to report to the client. So what we do is hard. It's real hard. And how you react is just another piece of the pressure cooker. But the first thing to do when you make a mistake is calm down, because that initial bleep moment that happens when you realize what's happened is not the time to be talking to anybody, whether it's the client, the senior partner, the firm managing partner, whoever that might be. That's not the moment to go talk to them. You've got to be calm. You've got to be rational. You've got to be analytical when you have those conversations. So that's the first thing. And I obviously still make mistakes today, maybe more than I ever have, candidly, but I think they're less important mistakes because I've learned, one thing I've tried to learn is not to make the same mistake twice. And if you can do that, you're ahead of the game to a large degree. And I probably talked long enough on this segment, so I'll yield to Dina or Cheryl to add on.
So let me say first, I'm kind of going through what you said, Robert, because you had such great words of wisdom. But I'm going to start with that ABA opinion. Yeah. So if you make a mistake and you're freaking out, right? Because what do we have as lawyers? We have our reputation, we have our ethics, almost above almost anything else, right? We're also good lawyers, but our ethics are so important to us. Just remember, if you take one thing away from this whole session, there's an ABA opinion. Just look it up, right? I mean, you could probably Google it and get it even without the number that Robert had provided. So if there's nothing else, take away that there's some guidance, because that is helpful. Small mistake, big mistake. I'm also going to say, so years and years ago, Robert and I were actually on a panel about insurance. And so when he talked about having malpractice insurance, I was like, oh, yes, that please have insurance. But I'm going to add to that of make sure you give proper notice to your carrier. So it's not just having the insurance. You can actually lose coverage if you don't give notice properly to your carrier. So just be aware of that. If circumstances come to a place that you need to give notice, if you worked with a broker, work with a broker. If you know there are coverage lawyers in town, talk to someone who might know, use the Google machine. Make sure that you don't lose that $1 million or more that Robert had mentioned with insurance. Transparency, what I kind of took away from the ABA opinion that you just mentioned, Robert, and what I had written down to answer the question anyway, is transparency, of make sure there's transparency with your client. But I want to go from the client side on that. So what the worst thing that I can have with my outside counsel is not having transparency, because, hey, look, I was at a law firm. I get it, right? Things happen. I know this. But identify things as quickly as you can. I mean, make sure you keep working on your cases and figuring out, oh, did I make a mistake? And then just be transparent. Let me know. Also come with a solution. That to me is probably the biggest thing, is like, all right, we're human, we make mistakes. What is our next step? Because the way I'm oriented is fix the problem. I'm sure there's in-house people. They're all very different on that. But it is what it is. Even if you lose a client over a mistake, you need to have that high standards of ethics, because you're going to keep practicing law, right? So make sure, even if something happens with that client, that you maintain your high ethical standard and you follow the guidance either of a mentor or the GC of your law firm, that type of thing, kind of all the things that Robert had just described.
And I'll just add that, in summary, it's basically, own it, report it, or relay it, and learn from it. As what was said, you really want to take ownership of it, because by reporting it quickly, you're, one, complying with ethical rules, but two, you're getting to control the narrative, right? It's probably going to get back to whomever and everyone that it touches anyways. And of course, it makes you feel better, because you're, oh my gosh, let me tell you what happened. This is going to be the way that you can explain exactly what happened and mitigate any damage and move forward with it. And along those lines, what can be very helpful, I find, is bouncing ideas off of people, if there's a mistake, kind of talk to others, even maybe that aren't directly impacted, and get their advice. What do you think? Should I do this? Should I do that? That can also help provide you with sort of your best plan. And then going forward, maybe that is a learning moment, and you can think about, in the future, maybe I should double check with somebody, or have somebody double check my how I calendar events, or bounce an idea off of someone in the future, or maybe get a subject matter expert on that topic. It's always, I think, beneficial, if the time permitted, if it makes sense from a business perspective, to, double check, work with others, and that can really help make sure that you're on target on the front end and on the back end.
All right. I agree. I think oftentimes people do miss the part of transparency when it comes to mistakes. And I think that really opens you up to more solutions to actually fix the problem. So I hear you all on that. But kind of along that same vein there, I think a lot of attorneys are perfectionists, probably indicating that they won't want to reveal a mistake. But it's certainly, the legal profession, it's an industry that leads itself to perfectionism, but we all know that's not realistic. So how did y'all ever fall prey to perfectionism in your practice? And if so, how'd you let it go? Or how would you advise someone new to the practice to let go of being a perfectionist?
Well, you almost don't have a choice. I mean, we all strive for perfection in what we do, but you just can't ever really get there. And in litigation, and Dina will, I'm sure, amplify on this, you can't let perfect be the enemy of good. Otherwise, you just suffer from paralysis by analysis, and you'll never get stuff out the door, and you just won't be a good lawyer. I mean, you can't practice. They teach you when you're a young guy or young gal and you just get your driver's license to drive defensively. You can't really practice law defensively, or you will get stomped on. And so you've got to be able to take chances. Not everything is going to work out the way you planned it, and you just have to be able to adapt and deal with whatever the ramifications are of what you've done. And you just have to let yourself do that. And it's a little different in the transactional context, and I'm sure Cheryl will address that, where if you say and instead of or in some 58-page document, it could come back and haunt you 10 years from now. I mean, that I don't know how you deal with, but in litigation, you just can't be perfect. You have to do what your gut tells you is the right thing to do at that moment, and you live with it, good, better, and different.
So let me at least say for the transactional lawyers here, if you ever mess up and versus or, I have literally filed an appellate court in the state of Texas that and means or. There's actual law on this. I'm not saying you're going to prevail, but at least, sand words there. So I remember telling a younger lawyer when I was at a law firm that sometimes a B plus and done is better than an A plus and late. But I think it's also context specific. So as an example, if I were a litigator on a case in federal court in front of Judge Barbara Lynn, who I love, she's fantastic, but man, reread before you submit anything, reread it before you send it in. And I don't say this in a bad way, but as we all know, our state court judges do not have the same type of help and law clerks and that type of thing. And so sometimes with them, B plus is great. Get that B plus effort in. It's not perfect, but it gets the point across. It's B plus, right? B plus is almost an A. Just get that B plus effort in. So I do think that's context specific, but I'm sure everyone both on the panel as well as the call has had that moment. You've sent a quick email and you go back and look at it later and you're like, oh my gosh, I had a typo, right? It probably happens to me daily and mostly because of autocorrect, but whatever. I mean, I can turn autocorrect off. But it happens. We do try our best, but sometimes it's so quick and you just got to get things done and out to push things forward. And it feels like in today's world, it's you almost don't have time to pause and reflect. So consider when it is appropriate to pause and reflect, take that deep breath, walk away from your computer, come back, because that typo will pop right out when you take that break, go get coffee or whatever. Just have that in the back of your head as we're dealing with this very, very quick world of ours.
And don't blindly trust Chat GPT.
Oh yeah, it hallucinates.
Coming down, and I would have thought lawyers would have gotten it after those New York lawyers got in trouble a couple of years ago, but it's still happening. And so very careful with that. That's another place where you're thinking, golly, I'm stuck. What can I do? Put it into Chat GPT and it gives you a great idea and maybe spits out some cases. Well, the cases don't necessarily say what Chat GPT says they do, or they may not even exist. So that's just a trap for the unwary that is just rearing its ugly head daily, it seems like.
And let me before Cheryl drops in on Chat GPT, this is again client perspective. I am not opposed to anyone starting with Chat GPT or AI. What I am opposed to is you not checking it, because I actually do think that you can also get great ideas if you're looking at your document management system and some other partner did a summary judgment motion. You're like, oh, that's a great idea. Where you get a great idea almost doesn't matter, but you got to make sure that your work is appropriate for what you're doing, either in the transaction or the litigation.
And along those lines, it's don't trust but verify, right? So basically, and it's a good thing to, if you're going to use some type of a platform, artificial intelligence. I mean, tell the client up front, hey, by the way, we were doing this massive research project, started with Harvey or ChatGPT, wanted to let you know, but we are checking every citation and statute to confirm the accuracy and confirm the information. I mean, let the client know, let the partner know, let people know what you're doing. That's always going to be helpful on the front end. And then, just to add to a little bit more about the perfectionism, in everything we do, transactional dispute type practices, it's all in a barometer of risk. And you have to evaluate the legal answer, which is often gray, may not be black and white, with the business risk. And so it's about, sometimes there isn't an exact answer. And so you have to explain to the client, well, if we go down this path and do this based on what I've found to date, this will lower the risk. This will increase the risk. What decision do you want to make? And and I've actually been a GC for a few years myself before going back to private practice. So in the in-house world that Dean is dealing with and your clients are often dealing with, and those of you on the phone are dealing with, I mean, it is triage, and it is in private practice too, but the volume is tremendous. So to her point, you've got to just get answers quickly, right? You've got to get there, and you're balancing that business decision and legal decision and all of the financial aspects and all of the different interests. And so it's an explanation, it's communication, it's putting those things together. And I think in private practice, by helping our clients and having that perspective, do great work, but at the same time, letting them understand, hey, there's no specific answer here, but this is where we're going to balance everything along with what you want to do from a business perspective. It just shows you're kind of taking that all into account, and it makes you look like a really, well-rounded lawyer. And again, there's no perfect answer, and I think people can appreciate that.
And Cheryl, I think you perfectly kind of illustrated how often we're pulled in different directions, and just the high pressure nature of the practice of law, where there's just a lot of competing interests often. But
I forgot to mention one more thing. The answer to the and/or question is and/or. You could just do both, and then that'll just make everybody happy. And/or.
I'll tell you, I try to take and/or out on policies and procedures because it's too much ambiguity.
I know.
I hear what you're saying, but every once in a while I leave it in.
Yeah,
my partner, the appellate brief writer, will tell you it's horrible. He hates and/or. It's one of his pet peeves.
Yeah, but there are times it's appropriate. Maybe not in an appellate brief. I get the appellate side. Unless you're arguing like I did. I was like, and means or, of course.
Yeah. I've definitely gotten a similar talk myself. But so keeping with that high pressure environment of law, like maybe you have a very active docket or where you handle complex deals a lot of the time, there's just a lot of things going on. How do you personally deal with that aspect of the legal practice? Just constantly having things juggling in the air. And what are some tips you could give a young lawyer to help navigate this aspect of the law?
Well, let me talk about a couple of things I do. And it's sort of developed during COVID. COVID kind of changed a lot of my personal habits. And I realized at the beginning of COVID that day was 24 hours and it was all work. It just seemed like there was no breaks during the day. It was just weird. Wasn't very healthy. Wasn't very productive, really. I mean, you were busier, crazy busier, but doing less, it seemed like. And so I developed this habits during COVID. I started walking in the mornings, like 2.5 to 3 miles, like every single morning. And it's amazing how you can kind of clear your mind out while you're doing that and actually think about what you need to think about and go do it. And so that was one thing, plus I got exercise that way. The other thing I do is at night, I just have a point in time where I shut it off. No more emails on the iPad, no more whatever. Last night about 8:30, I turn the Stars on, watch the end of the Stars and watch them lose. And then I watched Luka, so it was like, and so my big thing is I like sports and I like to watch sports. Everybody's got their own thing, whether it's watching Luka or watching a movie or watching, whatever the hot TV series is on Netflix or Hulu or whatever. Get away from it because that will help clear your mind. And when you never get away from it, you never clear your mind. And it just makes focus that much harder. And lack of focus equals mistakes. That's where it happens is, you think about you're reaching over to change the radio station in the car on the button. And, for half a second, you're distracted and something can happen. And so it's just that type of thing where you need to focus to avoid making mistakes. And whatever it is that works for you, make sure you do it. Make it a habit. The pressures, as Dina and Cheryl said, are absolutely real and they're constant, and they will be constant no matter how long it is you practice law, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, or 50 years, those pressures are going to be there. So you just have to learn physically and emotionally how to deal with it. And I promised when we had our planning session that I would talk about TLAP. And maybe this is as good a place as any to talk about that. In the run up to become DBA president, I'm sure Cheryl experienced this, and I know Dina would have with being president of DWLA and all. The things you learn at like ABA meetings are shocking. I mean, I just had no appreciation for the extent to which our profession is impacted by substance abuse, alcohol abuse, mental depression, suicides. But the statistics are staggering. And it used to be the gray-haired guys like me were the ones who had all the problems. Well, I'm not saying my generation is exempt because it's not, but the biggest problems are the audience for this presentation. The young lawyers, the law students. The statistics are 30% of those lawyers have a problem, whether it's substance abuse, alcohol, depression, suicide. And so you think about it, if you're in a gathering where there's like 50 some odd people online here, so a third of those would be about 18 people. You think about that. 18 people listening to this statistically have got a problem. Now it may be zero, but statistically it's a significant number. So if you're having a problem, if you know somebody who's having a problem, call the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program or TLAP. It's really about the best there is in the country, and it's completely anonymous, and they will come out and help. And it really is just that important because these pressures, like I say, they're there, whether it's from work related, whether it's the money you're making, is it enough to pay off the student loan debt? All those things, and all those things factor into how good of a lawyer you are and whether you wind up practicing law successfully or make a lot of mistakes. And like everyone has said, that can tar your reputation. Let me turn it over to Dina and Cheryl then.
I'm going to say something that Cheryl's going to be like, oh gosh, this former litigator, Dina, is now a transactional lawyer, is lists, y'all. This is just from yesterday of the things I have to urgently do. Lists. And you can see there's only 3 things crossed off. I need to urgently do these things. But in all seriousness, checklists are a big thing in transactional world for those who are in litigation. You have in litigation, not the same. But lists are great. And I look at it every day. And on the in-house side, you rarely get very far in your list. But you try every day because you're constantly reprioritizing. Like, what does your CEO say? Do you need to talk to your board chairman? That, of course, comes from ahead of almost anything else that you're doing. So for me, lists are amazing. And it can be any way. I happen to be old school. I do it on paper. I also do have lists on my phone. I sometimes have lists on my calendar appointment. I've got lists everywhere. I have lists of lists. And then sometimes I have to consolidate the lists and put them all on the same list. And the list that includes both work and professional and family, it's many, many pages, right? It's many pages of lists, but also ensures that I don't drop anything. Because the flow of in-house is a little bit different than litigation in that litigation is so deadline driven. The moment something comes in, you schedule, okay, this is when trial is, back off, and then this is when discovery ends, back off, this is when expert deadlines, so you're backing off from the dates. As soon as something comes in, calendar it, because then it's calendared, and so then you can rely on your deadlines as they are on your calendar. And make sure if you need to, if someone else is doing the calendaring, just kind of check and make sure that it looks about right. And just kind of just make sure you don't mess up a deadline from the actual scheduling of it itself. So I would say the first calendar, but I also want to talk about something that David McAtee, who's the general counsel of AT&T, is president of Dallas Association of Young Lawyers back in 2003. He always talks about steel sharpens steel. I love that. I embrace it without realizing it. That of course David McAtee has a McAteeism, but that's really for me when I've got something that's really important. I always bring in my second in command. Like we may draft an email to the board chairman, which she and I did yesterday, right? So I'll do the initial draft, I'll hand it to her, we edit it, I'll hand it to her again, we edit it, because these are things that are very political, as you might expect. You want to make sure that you look good to the board chair and that type of stuff. But consider that if that for me has been a great way, because one person can't know everything. I can't know everything and I can't see everything, and everyone's got a little bit different perspective. And so that in my current job is probably one of the most helpful things that I do, of bring other people in, talk it through with them, get a broader perspective. So it is likely that I've considered all of the things in that going forward with my recommendation or my legal guidance at my company.
All great points. And I'll just add along those lines, they don't teach you to be a project manager in law school. I mean, and in fact, I think it'd be wonderful if we all kind of took some project management courses or something, because you really are your own project manager. Some law firms have this, and some maybe in-house departments or companies do, but in the minority, that's a minority perspective. Majority is you are in control of your own practice and what you're working on, and managing it and keeping up with timelines and following through. So you're really your own project manager. And so what system works for you, lists, calendaring, there's all different ways to be organized, building in white space under calendar to make sure that you don't have calls and don't have time to do the work. So you're just overwhelmed. And as an associate, I think the big picture, just as kind of a reminder, probably most of is it's not just this person or client or partner gave me this question to answer. It's getting it all the way to the end of the final project. So that is your end goal. So you may turn in a memo, a draft, and be like, okay, I turned it in. So I'll just wait for him to respond. I'm done. Go on to my next thing. No. You want to follow up. You want to check in. You want to make sure it gets done. You want to make sure it gets to the client. If you can help those people, and so they don't have to come back to you, I mean, certainly they'll respond likely, right? But if they don't, or even when they do respond, you want to proactively check in if some time has passed. You want to make sure that and getting that final project out is the goal, not just sitting in the draft. Or you don't want to have the client or the person necessarily have to check in with you. Where are we on this? Where are we on that? Providing updates until it gets to the final step. By being ahead of the curve and not having people ask you where things are or checking in, and you're tracking it, you're following it, you're keeping up with it, you're showing that nobody else has to kind of help manage with your workload. It's huge for other people. You're making their jobs easier, and it really shows you're on top of your game.
All right. So I think we've kind of danced around it a little bit along the way and kind of hinted at it, but I think we want to get directly into it. What about if someone makes a colossal mistake, just something that cannot be undone? How do you dig yourself out of that hole and keep your career on a forward trajectory instead of, ending up with a license suspension or even disbarment?
Well, I think you do all the things we've talked about. And the first thing to do is be honest with yourself. Don't try to blame somebody else for your mistake, because, if it's a legal assistant having failed to calendar the statute of limitations properly, well, ultimately that comes back to you for not checking it. I mean, if there's a lawsuit brought by that person who lost their car wreck case because you waited 2 years and a day to file suit, they're not going to sue the legal assistant. They're going to sue you. So that's the first thing to do, is be honest with yourself about it. The next thing to do is call your carrier and then call the client and basically just be upfront saying, here's what's happened. The deadline is missed. Unfortunately, there's absolutely nothing that can be done about this, assuming that's the situation. And tell them that I've called the insurance company, and I'm hopeful that that can be worked out easily with them. And that's why I have insurance, is because we all make mistakes. Obviously, be open and honest with others in your firm if that's required, um, because you can make mistakes and will make mistakes, and it doesn't have to be a career ender, even if it's a case ender. It just doesn't have to be that, and it all depends upon how you react to it. The inclination is always, oh my goodness, what can I do about this? And most of the time there's something you can do, but sometimes there isn't. Like I say, if it's a statute of limitations, it is what it is. You can't overcome that in certain cases. So that's my best advice: is be honest, be truthful, be forthcoming, and be proactive.
Though I tell you on that, I think transparency is key on all of this and finding a solution. And sometimes when you're in the thick of the emotions, you can't see through the logic side of it because you are probably beating yourself up over making a mistake. But I'll tell you, had talked to in the last year, I talked to a lawyer about a statute of limitations issue, and that lawyer was in a different state and actually had law saying they didn't blow the statute of limitations. So sometimes talking to other people, kind of like what I had said before, steel sharpens steel, talking to other people actually can come up with solutions that are really helpful. Now, I would say if you identify an error and you need to fix it, come up with next steps. What is a potential solution to this? I would first, at a law firm, I would have first talked to the partner or the senior associate on the case. Even better if you also have a senior associate, maybe, hey, senior associate on the case, like, let's talk about this. I think I made a mistake. This is how. And if you don't have that, talk to the partner, do the same thing, but have an idea in the back of your head of a potential solution to the problem, or at least know if you've blown your appellate deadline, do some research beforehand of like, okay, how do you fix this? So you can come in with, okay, this is what I think that we can do, and then be transparent with your client as well. But Mac, you had said something earlier that I think is also good, of like, how do you emotionally deal with this? You have made a mistake. It happened. It is what it is. But you not only have to deal with a mistake, you still have to go forward being a lawyer. And that whole Ted Lasso concept of be a goldfish, please be a goldfish, because you are going to have to deal with whatever happened, deadline and new grade, whatever that is. You missed a client meeting, as Cheryl had said. You will have to deal with that, but you still have other clients, you still have other matters, you still have things you need to push forward. And so you're going to have to do a little bit of compartmentalizing of like, admit to yourself, kind of like Robert said, made a mistake. It happened. Okay, now let's deal with the mistake, but at the same time, deal with the rest of your practice, because you don't want to compound anything by making additional mistakes in other matters because of a single mistake that you had made. Even if it's major material, it doesn't matter. You still have other responsibilities in the practice of law.
I'll just add that, and also if you may want to look at the underlying cause. If for some reason, what is it? If you're seeing this was a really big mistake. Was it just oops? Was it an oops, or was it, oh my gosh, I'm not getting enough sleep, or I'm really stressed about such and such, or I've been going out too much, or whatever. Is there something that's maybe part of, there's an underlying cause, and this could be true for you, or maybe you're helping somebody else is dealing with a mistake, or you notice it might be having some issues or some with their practice, and you're trying to figure out what is that underlying cause. Can I be helpful to them? Is there something that's going on? Do they need help with something else in their life? So those are just things to think about, because sometimes if we're getting to a level where you're seeing this catastrophic mistakes, which are very few and far between, which is good. But if you're getting to that, or a lot of repetition, perhaps, which can lead to these really big mistakes, maybe there's something else there. And so whether that's you to kind of dig deep and figure out what that is, and maybe there's something that needs to happen, like I need to get more rest, I need more help, I need to hire other people, maybe I shouldn't be drinking as much, or whatever it is, or maybe there's a friend that has that issue. Those are things maybe also just to consider, to help turn things around. And I've seen people who have had addiction problems or whatever and have become heroes who speak on the topic and are these amazing leaders in the community because they have these incredible stories of what happened and how they've learned and become heroes and role models to others based on that, which just shows that you can turn something terrible into a miraculous thing, into a really wonderful thing that helps other people.
Absolutely. I think one of my earliest ethics CLEs that I attended was pretty much on that exact topic, as someone in the legal practice who became addicted due to stress or whatever, and then it just eventually kind of spiraled, affected their work, but they got back on track, and then they turned it all around. So I think that probably highlights that there's nothing that can't really be turned around as long as you take the right steps. But that, on an optimistic note, has there ever been a time when y'all have made a mistake in your practice and it resulted in maybe an unexpected opportunity or success, or maybe it resulted in some sort of new subject matter expertise that you use down the line?
Well, one thing about law practice, it's a learning experience every day. I mean, there's not a day that goes by where you won't learn something. It may not be something you want to know about necessarily, but you will learn things. And every time I've made a mistake, I've tried to make it a learning experience and try to turn it into a positive. And um, one thing I guess I've done is I've gone out and told other people about it. I've used myself as an example when I go out and do presentations like this one. And so I'm hopeful that, by doing that, others can avoid making the same sorts of mistakes, or, learn procedures that will help them avoid mistakes, like things like dual calendars. We used to just keep an old paper calendar, and Dina's got her paper lists, which are great. But the old paper calendars that we had, and then it went electronic, and and then there's backups and all those things you can do. And once you start learning about that, all those things will decrease the odds of making a deadline based mistake or some other type of mistake that's easily avoidable if you have it properly calendared with reminders. So it's those types of things. Be an advocate. Be an advocate for, here's what happened to me. Don't let it happen to you. Here's a way to avoid it. And those sorts of opportunities are always out there. Trust me. And like Cheryl said, some of the stories you hear from folks who have kind of been in a dark place and come back from it, and made all kinds of mistakes, whether it was in their working world or in their personal world, those are inspirational, and they are worth hearing. They are worth hearing. They're worth making time out of your day to hear those stories, because they can inspire you and help you. And so, again, I'm going to end where we began, which is what we do is really hard. And give yourself grace, give yourself the opportunity to say, I'm a good person, I'm a good lawyer, I'm not a bad lawyer, I'm not a bad person, because chances are you're not. If you've gone out and robbed a bank, that might be different, but that's not the people here. So just give yourselves the opportunity to make things right when a mistake happens. And generally speaking, you're going to be fine.
So I know of a younger lawyer friend who was in the back of the Texas Bar Journal, and it wasn't related to addiction. This person had made a real error and got disbarred. That person is now in compliance. And so for that person, going to a law adjacent area and seems to be completely thriving. So even if the very, very, very worst thing happened, there's still truly there's still hope, right? I mean that you can still do things that maybe is not within the practice of law, but you can bring your skills to bear in another way. But I kind of love how you ended, Robert, of the rebuild, recenter, go back to the basics, right? Like go back to, all right, let's make sure that I'm doing things, not if I made a mistake because I was too superficial. Go back to basics. All right, how do I fix that? How do I resolve that? How do I know I'm a great lawyer? How do I make sure that that comes out in my work in all ways? I think that's great advice, Robert.
I agree with everything said. I would just add that I think these situations do make us stronger. It teaches us to not, sit on our laurels, but to kind of think about how we can improve and get better and find a new way to do things. And also, I think it strengthens relationships. Don't go through it alone. Don't. It can be a scary thing when something bad happens. Go to your mentors, go to the people in your group, go to your family, go to your friends, and talk to them about it and get the advice. It's going to be very much a soothing experience for you. It's going to be helpful for you to come up with a better response, and it's going to strengthen your relationships. People want to help people. You might end up with a whole new mentor or friend or somebody, or a stronger relationship than you had before, because you have this bonding experience. You're working together to come up with a solution, and you're going to help each other in so many ways. And they're going to be probably coming to you down the road when something comes up on their end. So don't be afraid to reach out. I think it'll only help you in the future.
Hey, Mac, I see that there's a question, and if you don't mind, can I mention the question, then answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely.
It has any advice for what to do after you make a mistake that the partners in the firm can't seem to forget? Any tips for moving past that after addressing the immediate issue? So what I had described of messing up a mock trial, mess it up, right? Mess it up. So I had to overcome that, truly, because I was up for partner the next year, y'all. And so it's staying steady, keep doing the great work, and make sure that your mentors and champions at your firm. I mean, if you make a mistake, be honest about it. Look, I made a mistake. This is what I'm doing to fix it. Make sure those who support you do know this, and I mean, keep as much as you can, as steady as you can be after making a mistake. And in terms of the partners at your firm is the best thing that you can do after you rebuild that confidence, because that confidence has you are now in a position that you're lacking confidence. And to be honest, there might be a time at which that you need to move on. I mean, if it's really something that you cannot fix the situation at your firm, then you may need to go, you know what, I have made my best efforts here, and it's not going to be successful. So I need to go, and I need to move on.
I think what Dina just said would be my response as well. If after you've done everything to fix the mistake, move on from it, show the others in your firm that you're a really good lawyer, and they can't get past it, well, then you got to ask yourself, are these people I want to be partners with at some point in time? And if the answer to that is no, then, not every law firm's a good fit for everybody. So, and personalities are a big part of what makes law firms either work or not work. And Dina's advice, I think, is spot on that. I see there's another question.
Can I just add one more thing on that? Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Just to add one more thing on that. Another thing is, as everybody mentioned, showing you're a really good lawyer, and and taking all the right steps and building advocates. And if you have those advocates, that's that you can tell, you might not be turning everybody around, but you have some advocates that can support you. You go to them and ask for their advice and ask them to help you. If you have others speaking up for you, that can speak volumes. So you're not only advocating for yourself, but you're having your cheerleaders speak up for you. And you may have those people, those key people that can help turn those other folks around that just aren't, they're busy, they're not paying attention, and they're not getting the message. But hey, oh, if so and so is saying this and advocating, maybe I'll, give this person, I'll realize, oh, my perspective was off. So that could be another way to go about it.
So the
Good
next
for-
question is a good question too. Like any advice on how to address other mistakes when they're so someone else's mistakes when they want to blame you for their mistakes, specifically if they're higher up than you. And I know, Robert, you want to answer it, but I will say sometimes, true story, I will send an email to myself. Like if there's something weird going on, I was like, oh, I don't, okay, send an email to myself so I have a contemporaneous recollection from the hearsay rule. Robert, what's your thought?
I think that's a great idea. And, I think having a face-to-face with this other lawyer and basically saying, here's what happened from my perspective. Tell me what you think happened and see if you can talk it out. And maybe you have to involve all the partners in the firm if it's gone firm wide. Hard to generalize too much on something like this, but again, don't be afraid to defend yourself. I mean, we're telling you to do your mea culpas when you make a mistake, but if you haven't made a mistake, stick up for yourself and basically say, here's what I did on this. If there's something I could have done better, I'm happy to hear it. But here's what happened, and here's my understanding of where the problem was, and certainly happy to try to help fix it in any way I can. But I love Dina's idea of having a memo to yourself saying, here's what's going on here, and this isn't quite right. This isn't what happened. That's a good idea.
I'll add that also, people get real defensive, pointing fingers, and it's a tough situation. I would think about it. Defend yourself, certainly, but ultimately, whoever you have to report it to, however you handle it, is it real important to say so and so did this or so and so did that, or can you all just kind of say this is what happened? Our firm was working on this, and we fixed it, and this is what we're doing. We. If you can kind of make it a collective, like we fixed it. Nobody has to point to a specific person. It goes over more smoothly, even if you really didn't, cause the problem. It just makes it an easier story to tell.
And again, you have to ask yourself, is this somebody I want to be partners with at some point in time? I mean, that question needs to always be asked and answered before you can really come to grips with it. How do you manage anxiety without medicating? Have something you like to do and do it, whether it's going out and playing pickleball or going to a movie or reading a book, watching TV, whatever it is. Find a way, find an outlet, find something, that takes you away from it. And my experience is that reduces your desire to want to go have a drink or something else, whether it's prescription medication or whatever. Just have something you like to do that gets you away from it, because the law is a jealous mistress, as they tell you in law school. It's a true statement. There's always another point you can research. There's always another paragraph you can write. There's always another spell check you can do on the document. There's always something you can do, and you just can't do it all. And you can't expect. We talked about perfectionism a little while ago, and it just doesn't happen. So you gotta be forgiving to yourself.
I'm also going to add, sometimes things feel overwhelming when it first comes in. At my last law firm, I did some of the appellate work, and I remember when there would be a response to an appellate brief that I wrote, that I would go, oh my God, we're going to lose, right? Okay, stop. Have that feeling, because it happens, right? Like, okay, let's piece by piece, like take this apart. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So take it piece by piece, and then if you can address it in smaller chunks, that will bring your anxiety down. Because the big thing, yeah, oh my gosh, this is terrible. No, all right, it all comes in chunks. This case is this correct? This paragraph, is it correct? And so if you can break it up in chunks. And sometimes for me, other than the health things that as Robert was talking about, it's also sometimes anxiety for me allows me to lean in a way that's almost like a super focus. So if you can channel that anxiety in a way that's positive, like the best example for me is when you're going to trial, right? When you're going to trial, there it is rife with anxiety because you've got all the things, right? But if you can channel that into getting the things done as opposed to leaning back, lean in if you can. I'm not saying everyone can, but think about that as a strategy.
Mac, did you want us to provide for other questions or email addresses or?
Absolutely. Yeah, please do.
Mine is, if you have any questions at all, my email address is robert.toby. I'm just kidding. No, really. Oops, I made a mistake. No, my email address is ccmurray, and that's 2 C's and then MURRAY @jw.com. So if you'd like to email me personally, or certainly anybody else are going to give you their email addresses, happy to answer any questions at all.
Yeah, and same here. D Stro like the beer, not related. So DSTROH @ntta.org. It's important that .org. And if you want to get together, I mean, it may be a little while before I can get on my calendar, but reach out and I'll have my assistant find a time that works for you and works for me.
And don't send it to robert.toby. It won't get. Mine is robert@jtlaw.com. It's again, robert@jtlaw.com. Look forward to helping any way I can. Really enjoy working with young lawyers and trying to help them out of tough spots when they come up.
And if anybody, wants to talk to someone close to their peer group or, just has any questions for me as well, mine is Mac, M-A-C, @Payne Mitchell. That's PAYNE Mitchell, MITCHELL.com. But I appreciate y'all helping out here today and answering some sometimes tough to talk about questions. And thank you for being here.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good luck.
Appreciate it.